UK ranks 59th globally for mobile download speeds. We are sitting behind countries like Kazakhstan, Peru, and Vietnam.
The planning system in the UK, it not only delays rollout, it makes it more expensive.
The prize is up to £37 billion in additional gross value added by the mid-2030s.
Welcome everyone back to Policy Unplugged for another session, a podcast that looks at the policy that matters to mobile. Now today I'm really excited because we've got Jack Rowlett with us, who is from the Buffering Britain campaign. So Jack, how are you?
I'm good, thank you for having me.
Brilliant. Well, I mean, tell us a little bit about Buffering Britain. It's a new campaign that's come out, what's the sort of reason behind it, and what's it for?
Well, the reason behind it is that myself and Ben Cope, who I've been running this campaign with, are massively frustrated, as I'm sure many of your listeners are, with the poor signal that we're all suffering with. We're fed up with waiting for the government to make a change, and we want to draw attention to this problem. It's a growth problem. It's a problem for consumers. It's a problem with our planning system. We want to demonstrate the extent of this problem, the economic cost, the impact it's having on people's lives, and make it an unignorable issue for our politicians at both a local and a national level.
Thank you for that, Jack. I mean, for some of our listeners who might wonder, why are we bringing on Jack here to talk about why the signal is bad? I think, we would recognise similarly that the league tables that are out there, we want to be higher on that. And I think what's really interesting is the way you've taken this and is looking at what are the solutions as well. But before we go into that, I mean, just elaborate a bit more on what are the campaign findings that you've had so far in terms of, what is the issues and why does it matter?
So I think we have to separate out the why it matters from the issue itself. I think the why it matters is that it's both enormously frustrating. We've all had the issue where we're trying to take a work call while we're on public transport or walking somewhere, and you just get these drop connections, or you're trying to send that email and it won't connect. And this is enormously, it's both enormously frustrating, but it's also having a really measurable impact on growth. This is costing us literally billions of pounds to the British economy every year through the poor connectivity that we have. It has an impact on inequality because people from poorer backgrounds are more reliant on phone signal. They're less likely to have, a broadband connection at home. So there's an economic divide there as well. And you talk about the findings that we've focused on so far. I mean, one absolutely staggering one, the UK ranks 59th globally for mobile download speeds. We are sitting behind countries like Kazakhstan, Peru, and Vietnam. And this, I think, in a first world nation is absolutely disgraceful. And we have to do something about this, and we have to solve the barriers to ensuring that Britain is connected. And from our research and from what we've been focusing on so far, many of these barriers are, like with so much else, through the planning system. It is simply too hard to both get masts built and also to do the vital upgrades to the existing infrastructure, which I know is the bulk of what is needed to manage the transition to 5G. The planning system simply makes it too hard to do that. And politicians, both at a local level, often at a local level, but also at a national level, they're simply not at the moment incentivized to do anything about it, because the opponents are really, really loud. And actually, a lot of the people who really benefit from good phone signal are often, they're busy people. So they don't necessarily have time to, organize a campaign to oppose the construction of a mast in their local area.
And if we are to sort of this sort of unpack some of this that you're saying about the planning system, I mean, the planning system in the UK, it not only delays rollout, it makes it more expensive, and comparatively with other countries, the UK is more expensive to roll out, which equally impacts the economic situation here. And I think coming on to some of the impacts that you've mentioned there. But why do you think we have a system where, while we seem to feel the majority have adopted mobile, they take it on, they want to use it, and we're seeing it becoming a necessity rather than a luxury, but why do people still reject it? Why is it, like you say, local politicians taking this opportunity to use the planning system as a way to object?
Well, I think part of it is that it's very easy to cause a kind of objection in this way, and it will often be people who are generally a bit older, who maybe don't have, maybe have more time to oppose, and actually the people who would tend to support the rollouts of this type of infrastructure are often, they're not necessarily aware that a mast is being built in their area, or that there are these upgrades coming forward. And that's something that we want to do as a campaign, is to really draw attention to that upgrade work that is taking place, and the new mast applications going through the planning system, so that we can mobilize support behind them. Because I think in lots of cases people just aren't aware. We've been talking to lots of people since we launched, and they're totally unaware that the planning system is even a problem that's holding phone signal back. So I think it's about demonstrating to politicians that actually there is support for expanding this infrastructure, for getting Britain connected. I think that's one of the absolute key barriers at the moment. And also the system itself is not designed particularly well. Certainly if you compare to other countries, across the board, the British planning system kind of bakes in uncertainty because it's so discretionary. What we need to do is make it much more checkbox based. Where, if you're coming forward with something that checks a list of check boxes, that you can then do that development work easily. It's not at the kind of discretion of local councillors to the same extent that it is now. And that's a sort of more medium term goal that we've got as well.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, I think to local councils, one of the issues they have as well is the resources at their end, in that planning departments and the likes have been salami sliced. They've had people and resources taken away, or people retiring, and it's become very difficult. And part of the parcel opportunity here is, how do we ensure minor upgrades aren't necessarily taking up the full time of the planning system? So we're talking about, we've obviously identified planning here as being key to this. But why is now? Why is it now a real opportunity? Why is Buffering Britain doing this campaign at this stage? What can we do?
Well, I think there's a few things. So at the moment, obviously, the government is coming forward with a new national planning policy framework, which hopefully is going to be published later this year. That's a massive opportunity to force a change, because that document sort of sets the tone for planning policy across the country from the very top. There's also, they're consulting on changes to permitted development rights too, or they finished the consultation for that, but they'll be bringing forward proposals in that area too. And we want to put pressure on the government there to make sure that those do make it easier to roll out this infrastructure that we need. It's also a vital moment for growth. This government talks a good game on economic growth, but making it easier to roll out mobile infrastructure is something that is, essentially free. It doesn't cost the government anything. It's a simple change. These changes can be made mostly through secondary legislation. It doesn't require lots of parliamentary time. And the growth impacts are enormous. We could be looking at tens of billions over the next kind of 15 to 20 years as a result of this move to 5G and improving the terrible connection that is currently people are experiencing at the moment due to that shortage in capacity. And then I think there's also another route or another important strand here, which is that this is an important moment technologically. We are seeing lots of new technologies come forward, such as autonomous vehicles, new AI tools, remote surgery, lots and lots of new kind of exciting areas of technology which will rely on 5G connections in order to roll out. And if there is not enough capacity for those things to come online, then other countries are going to get those new technologies and the growth and societal benefits as a result of them, and we're going to be lagging behind.
And Jack, you've given us the sort of background here, and it seems clear. Yet, as an industry, what we're finding interesting is that we are being told what the issues are. Your campaign has really well articulated those issues. Yet, the ask we're being asked of government is then to prove those issues to get those changes. And it seems a rather strange one, where the government is saying, we know what the issue is, we want to change it, but now prove to us the issue. I mean, what do you have to say to that? Because for me, in actual, your campaign is one of these evidence bases that shows and again proves those issues.
Yeah, no, I agree, and certainly one thing that we're going to be doing in the coming months is really trying to make this an unignorable problem for politicians, simply by really demonstrating again the impact of this issue. I think part of the problem, and this is not a criticism of the industry at all, but I just think it's kind of the way things work, that often it is easier for the government to ignore kind of industry groups than it is to ignore the general public, because ultimately industry groups don't have a vote at general elections in a way that the public do. So what we're trying to do is present sort of grassroots pressure on the government. And I think it's really about empowering people, because actually when we talk to people since we've launched this campaign, I don't think we've spoken to a single person who says, "Oh no, this isn't a problem. I have great phone signal." Everybody has stories of professional embarrassment, personal irritation as a result of the lack of phone capacity that they're experiencing, but they simply don't know why that's the case. The kind of chain of events and the problems in the background that have led to that point. So I think it's about empowering them with the knowledge. And also then encouraging them to try and do something about it. And that's what we're going to be doing in the coming weeks, is presenting people with the opportunity to actually submit their own evidence, their own stories of how this is impacting them. And then we're going to go to politicians and we're going to say that something needs to be done about this, because your voters are really upset about it. And now they know why this problem is happening, and it's up to you to make a change.
And Jack, one of the key areas of the National Planning Policy Frame, which you've mentioned a number of times, is getting the weighting right. I think it's that point. This isn't a nice to have. This is critical national infrastructure. And yet, when we look at the National Planning Framework and the way councils are using that, they seem to be using it more so in a way that sort of is an objection tool. And one of the things that we've been very concerned about as an industry with the National Planning Policy Framework is it removes at the current draft a paragraph that states how important digital infrastructure is. I mean, is this something that needs to change? You said there's this, all the people you're speaking to, all the case studies you have, are people saying, actually, this is very, very necessary. Yet the perception that people seem to have is that a very small minority of people seem to have more opportunity to object than those majority that need it.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think the NPPF does definitely need to be strengthened in that area. We do need to consider this the critical national infrastructure that it is. I think ultimately, sadly, politicians often take the path of least resistance, and this is in a lot of ways quite a sort of quiet area, or it has been for a long time. People have not been kind of mobilized to go to their politicians and try and do something about it. In the same way that you've seen, on housing, for example, you've seen the debate totally change, because there have been lots of campaign groups to kind of get more housing built, to change the planning rules around housing, because they've identified that the planning system is such a big problem there. We want to really do the same thing for mobile infrastructure, because it's just as important. But I don't think there has been that type of pressure. So I think that's what needs to happen. We need to give politicians a reason to do this, because sadly, you can present them with all of the kind of evidence in the world, unless you're attaching it to the kind of case studies of day-to-day voters and making it an issue that the public understand and are putting pressure on politicians themselves, then they're unfortunately not going to do anything about it.
And this is about really putting this up the priority list. And it's interesting you mentioned that. We saw a planning and infrastructure bill now act, or on the Motor Act, and yet that didn't include mobile in it. And I think this is where we're coming back to saying this secondary legislation here. Your point about it doesn't cost anything for the government to change these frameworks and regulations. Yet we have a very clear focus on things like AI and data centers. We saw a national planning policy statement for data centers. Yet the priority doesn't seem to come out with mobile, and in some ways, it's a system that often people only really recognise when it doesn't work, or they have an issue with it. And I think this is where your campaign really does focus the issues and shows that there is something that needs to be done. And as you've rightly highlighted, the opportunity to do stuff is there on the table now. If this needs to be our priority and you had the opportunity to speak to a government minister, what would you say to he or she to move this forward and to get that priority for mobile connectivity?
Well, I would be saying, I would be drawing attention to the views of their voters, which is that they believe this is, overwhelmingly a problem. And I would be saying, if you really believe that one of the main problems in the UK right now is poor growth, if you really want to do something about that, then you cannot ignore the poor mobile connectivity that we have, and you have to do something about the planning system. I would be saying we need to change how permitted development rights work in this area. We need to have targeted reforms to make it much easier to make those changes to existing sites. We need to streamline the approval process for them and to reduce the kind of paperwork and interactions with the planning system that occur for these lower impact changes in particular. I know that most of the changes that need to be made to the infrastructure is not actually building new masts; it's upgrading existing ones. That needs to be made much easier, and I think that's an area where you can potentially have less public opposition as well among that sort of minority of loud opponents.
Yeah, if I could come into that one, you are right. I mean, in our consultation response that we did to the Permitted Development Rights and National Planning Policy Framework, 95% of the build going forward is upgrades. So again, it's not about new masts going all over the country and anywhere. This is actually upgrading the existing footprint and doing things. And you said targeted reforms. Again, our mantra here is it's small changes, big impact. Small changes are things like being able to put multiple antennae onto an existing mast. So if we wanted to put, at the moment, there's a limit on 3, or for instance, if a mast has to change slightly in size, at the moment we have to have it exactly on the same footprint. We can't, for instance, have it 2 or 3 centimeters left or right, because that would push it into full planning. So you have that sort of unintended consequence in some cases where you may have a perfectly good mast, which people are used to, and it has antennas on it, but adding one more pushes it into another need for another mast, which you don't need. So it's those small targeted changes that could have such a big impact.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agreed. That is, it's such an easy change. It wouldn't cost the government anything. It's secondary legislation. The government could do this basically tomorrow if they wanted to. We're here to put the pressure on them to do this. And I think also, you look at often when new masts are built, there's opposition to them because, there is a vocal minority of people in this country who don't like anything being built. But if you've already got a mast there, the impact of an upgrade to that mast, making it a bit wider or a bit taller, adding an extra antenna onto it, that isn't that great a visual impact. And the enormous connectivity and growth benefits of making it easier to do that are simply worth it.
And just, if you can articulate what is the growth prize here, getting this right, we're competing on a global level here. This isn't just a UK thing. And to be competing on a level, we need world-class connectivity. I mean, from your side and your campaign, what is the opportunity? What is the prize?
Well, the prize is up to £37 billion in additional gross value added by the mid-2030s. That is an enormous amount of money when we talk about, Britain's problems with increasing its GDP. That is an enormous prize. And then you also have all of the kind of added productivity benefits, dropped calls, dropped meetings, all of this stuff, that we all experience in our daily lives repeatedly. It all adds up. It has a productivity impact. Productivity growth is a huge problem in the UK, and improving our mobile infrastructure is a core part, I think, of solving that productivity problem.
And then so what is the message to the government? Is it get on with this and change, look at the frameworks and ensure that they are changed? From our point of view, the options are on the table.
Yeah. The message to the government is get on with this. We already know what the policy solutions are to a very large proportion of this problem. The government needs to get on with doing it. And if they don't do it, then we are going to make their lives increasingly difficult simply by mobilizing people to make their voices heard. And get as large a number of people as possible to submit their evidence of how this is impacting them in daily life and make this an unignorable problem for the government.
Brilliant. Look, I say thank you so much for coming in and explaining things. I think it's a really fascinating campaign. As I say, from an industry point of view, we recognise where we are and where we want to be, and I think we align on the changes that we believe are needed. And we want to get on and build those networks. We have targets in place. There's a lot of investment going in, but the framework needs to be right for a modern digital system. So, Jack, thank you so much. And for everyone who has been listening today, once again, thank you. Please do like and subscribe to the podcast. And I look forward to seeing you next time.